What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another review, and this time we're taking a look at Better Call Saul Season 6, the final season of Better Call Saul, and the overall conclusion to the Breaking Bad universe. So, let's waste no time, let's get right into it. I'm going to do this in parts. I'm going to review the first 7 episodes of Better Call Saul, and then I'll do the remaining episodes of Better Call Saul. So, let's just get down to brass taxes. The first 3 episodes of the last season deal with wrapping up Nacho's storyline, and it's basically the fallout of the of season 5's finale with Nacho betraying Lalo and Lalo's compound going under siege in a big firefight, which Lalo survives, but is believed now to be dead as a result. So the first 3 episodes of season 6 is basically wrapping up that entire arc. For the most part, I like how it's handled. Though I would have combined episodes 1 and 2 into one hour and a half long episode. That's just me. I think having it being split up kind of makes the season drag a little bit. But overall, I thought it was really well handled. Michael Mondo's performance in his last 3 episodes are really, really damn good, especially the last episode where he has this heartwarming final goodbye to his dad, and you can really see the emotion in Mondo's performance. Like, he really brought the character of Nacho to life from season 1 all the way to season 6, pretty much making Nacho into somebody who is reluctantly in this life, but still has some goodness within him, especially when it comes down to his family. I like that. Like, Nacho is one of those rare Breaking Bad characters that you actually root for and you want to see survive and get out of his ordeal and try and restart his life. Unfortunately, that does not happen when you get to the end of episode 3, where he's pretty much taken captive by the cartel and shoots himself after he pretty much admits to doing everything. But at the same time, he also makes sure that he does not, single out Gus, because the whole deal that he made is for his dad to be safe, is to not have Gus take the fall and be revealed as the orchestrator, as the one who really planned the attack on Lalo's compound. So I like how Nacho pretty much blames an outside party while making sure Gus's name is clear, because that would have contradicted everything from Breaking Bad if he would have let him go. But yeah, for the most part, I like how all that stuff is handled. That stuff is handled really, really well. I liked it, and like I said, Michael Mondo's performance is really, really well done. Even though I said that the first 3 episodes could have been condensed a little more, that doesn't mean you don't have some good stuff in it. Especially episode 2, you got this really intense firefight / car chase between Nacho and the cousins, which is really intense at a hotel parking lot. That was good stuff. Like, that's like Breaking Bad levels of good stuff. Like I have very little complaints when it comes to how they handled ended Nacho's conclusion. He went out the only way he could go out, which is by his own hand, and to making sure the ones he loves are safe, while at the end of the day giving the cartel one big final FU, especially Hector, when he reveals that I'm the one who put you in that wheelchair. You think of me. Like, the last 30 seconds of Nacho's life where he tears down the entire cartel is great stuff. That's where Mondo's performance really comes out. So yeah, despite extending it longer than it should, overall good stuff. In terms of Lalo in this season, we see Lalo in episode 1. He survives. He goes to this farm of people he knows. He kills them. He makes it look like one of the corpses is his, and then he goes into a truck trying to stay underground. And then you don't see Lalo for about 3 or 4 episodes straight, which I thought was a mistake. I would have liked to have seen just little tidbits of Lalo with the other episode in the 3 episodes that he disappeared from, just doing some undercover things, like doing stuff like that. Instead, he literally just disappears. But it's a give and take. Even from a personal standpoint, I would have liked to have seen more Lalo, because Tony Dalton is phenomenal in the role, and he knows how to bring that uncomfortable charm and unsettling sinisterness to the character of Lalo, where you can't take your eyes off him. Like, the performance is that deep and that rich, and is so full of nuances. Like, the little quirks that Tony Dalton gives Lalo really makes the character come to life. Like, I would have liked to have seen little tidbits of Lalo throughout the episodes where he's not really a big deal before actually coming back to finish up his arc. Like that to me is a mistake. That to me, like, to some it's a nitpick. To some it's no one minds it. To me it's a nitpick. However, I do like the whole thing of doing the old Hitchcock trick. Like, the audience knows that Lalo's still alive. The characters themselves are unsure if Lalo's dead or alive. So you kind of have this whole ticking time bomb scenario where Lalo can pop up at any moment. So I do like the Hitchcock trick that they do utilize, and they make it work to its fullest potential because it affects Gus, it affects Kim. You know, these two are constantly paranoid as to when Lalo's going to show up, especially Gus, and of course Kim after her interaction with Lalo in season 5, and the things that, and what happened with Jimmy and Mike in the desert during Bagman. So I like that. So I like that whole thing of this constant paranoia. Of the constant paranoia. So it's all good stuff. Even though I like to see more of Lalo, it's still good. In terms of Jimmy and Kim, their whole ideal is to try and discredit Howard by doing every single thing possible to make Howard look like a drug addict, so that way the Sandpiper case can be settled and handled with, and Jimmy can get his payout, basically. They're pretty much tearing down Howard just to get for money. Of course, when you get to episode 7, Howard has his own theories about that. You know, this is what it is. I found this to be the most least interesting part of season 6 is Jimmy and Kim playing their games with Howard. Like, when you watch season 1 all the way to 6, like, Howard is not the world's greatest guy, but he didn't really do anything that warranted this kind of extreme treatment from Kim and Jimmy. It's being done out of sheer pettiness at this point, and you kind of feel sorry for Howard. Like you know, Howard did try to make amends with these two. To whether or not he was being genuine is entirely up to the audience. I like to believe that Howard was being genuine now that Chuck was gone. You know, he was trying to like set the wrongs right in a way. Of course, Jimmy and Kim were too far gone the rabbit hole to want to even consider something like that. But you got to give credit where credit's due. Patrick Fabian's performance as Howard Hamlin in this last season was awesome, especially when you get to episode 7 and his overall conclusion, which is both a shock, it's devastating, and it just cements the fact of, whoa, almost anyone can get, like, whoa, that was intense. But I will get to that momentarily. But yeah, you got the whole thing of Howard being, have Jimmy and Kim like trying to do whatever they can to discredit Howard. You know, they have, which was established in season 5 with Saul, who's now by Saul Goodman at this point, doing these things of Howard being caught with hookers, making it look like he's paying for hookers, making him look like he's a drug addict and things like that. All that gets expanded upon in season 6. In episode 7, there's this one scene where Jimmy has his film crew take pictures of a fake judge giving Jimmy a bribe, and then when you get to the actual mediation scene, it's revealed that the pictures that Howard saw were switched out for pictures of just some random guy giving Jimmy a frisbee, and this causes everyone to look at Howard, who's blaming the judge that there's something wrong with him. This is what causes the Sandpiper thing to be forced into a settlement, of course. And Howard of course looks bad because of it. Because number one, he looks like he's taking drugs because Jimmy and Kim spiked his drink, and it's making everyone around him just question his decisions, question everything about him. And this, of course, is what leads to his conclusion at the end of the episode. But before that, you have this scene of Howard and Jimmy duking it out in the boxing ring, which is pretty much the 6 seasons of Better Call Saul leading up to this point. Howard has admittedly always liked Jimmy, but because of Chuck, Jimmy always had this thought that Howard never really liked him, and because of that, there's always been a resentment between the two. So having them duking out in a boxing ring was a nice little payoff to their little feud, where some physicality came into it. So I like all that stuff. All that stuff is handled fairly well. You do get some good stuff with Mike Pepper throughout this season as well, but he doesn't really do all that much. Mike's character has pretty much been wrapped up, and more or less this is just an epilogue of scenes of him just doing a couple of things here and there, but not doing anything of any real significance, with the exception of making sure Gus does not harm Nacho's dad. And Mike pretty much telling Nacho that anyone who goes through your dad will have to go through me. But other than that, Mike is solely in his role as one of Gus's men, having already dealt with and gotten over the Warner Ziegler stuff. So now we go back to Lalo. Like I said, from episode we see Lalo episode 1, and then we have a 3-4 episode break where Lalo disappears. Towards the end of the first half of the season, Lalo does make his return. We see him in Germany, wooing the widow now of Warner, Marguerite, trying to get some information out of her, breaking into her home, looking for anything he can. He sees this plaque, which leads him to Casper, who was one of the men that was working with Warner on creating the meth lab. And I like the fact that Lalo was the one who discovered the meth lab, and Lalo was the one who was about to rat out Gus to everyone else. I mean, the show does got to pull some contrivances in order for that fact not to slip, like the whole thing of Lalo trying to call Hector, and then having the notion that, that Gus could have bugged that in order to do trace calls, and Lalo, has to do other ways to not, slip up what he knows, what he knows. I like the whole idea of him hiding in the sewers with his video camera, taking these visual notes and for the cartel in order to send them out, so that way they know what Gus is up to in creating the super lab and the laundromat. Like, all that stuff I thought was really well handled, really, really good stuff. And once again, Tony Dalton proves that he's the man. And now we get to the conclusion of season 7. Now we get to the conclusion of the first half and episode 7. As I mentioned before, all the events lead from the beginning of the season with Nacho killing himself and revealing to the cartel that he was the one that allowed Lalo's compound to get gunned down, that he was the one that nearly killed Hector and would have succeeded if Gus had not have saved Hector. And all the shit that Kim and Jimmy have been doing to Howard now culminates in the final 5 minutes of episode 7, which is intense and it's great stuff. Patrick Fabian's performance, where he's singling out Jimmy and Kim, pretty much coming to the conclusion that they never hurt his career for money. They hurt his career just for the sheer sick thrill of it. And then we get Jimmy and Kim have the shocking revelation that Lalo is alive. He's in the house with them. And you're literally on the edge of your seat. Lalo is just in full view of all three. They all acknowledge that he's there. And Lalo is just like, I'm here to talk to my lawyers. And as everything's going down, Lalo gets a gun out, puts a silencer on, shoots Howard dead in the head. Jimmy, shocked to shit, and Lalo, is being Lalo, just looks at them with that sinister smile, as if you think that what I did to him is anything, wait till you see what I will do to you if you don't tell me what I want to know. Oof. That is how you end an episode, with a shocking death. And a tragic death at that, because of all the things Howard Hamlin did and all the things that he was going through because of Kim and Jimmy, Howard Hamlin did not deserve death. But the death worked as a warning to both Kim and Jimmy that shit's about to hit the fan. I liked all that stuff. Great stuff. So yeah, the first half of season 6, it's a mixed bag just for me personally, because I would have condensed the first 2 episodes and I would have sprinkled Lalo more throughout. But other than that, you got some good stuff in these first 7 episodes, and just wait and see what the rest of the season has in store. Okay, so the second half of season 6 of Better Call Saul is where everything finally comes full circle. So, when we left off with the first season, Lalo had just killed Howard Hamlin in a shocking death. Now, pretty much episodes 8 and 9 serve as pretty much the finalization of the prequel portion of Better Call Saul, pretty much lining up everything into the Breaking Bad timeline. So episode 8 basically deals with the fallout of Howard's death, and Lalo pretty much using Kimmy and Jim to try and get to Gus, which eventually happens. Of course, this leads to the biggest part of this episode is the big showdown between Gus and Lalo, which takes place in the underground meth lab. Now, I'm of 2 sides about this. Number 1, I have been waiting since season 4 for Lalo and Gus to have their showdown. The fact that took place in Gus's super lab makes it all worthwhile. In terms of the execution of it, could have been done much better than what it was. However, when you look at the context of everything, I do like it. I like the context post the showdown between Gus and Lalo. as opposed to the showdown being for what it was. I expected much, much more from it. That's just me personally, but it is what it is. The fact that Lalo is the only man to put the fear of God into Gus is fantastic because Tony Dalton's portrayal as Lalo, he's got that sadistic charm and that killer instinct that he's gonna come at you with a smile. And even though Gus does win, the fact that Lalo smiles while he's dying is fantastic. Like, it really is fantastic. But I also like what Gus does. Gus buries Lalo, in the foundation of the super lab, and they also buried Howard Hamlin in the depths of the super lab. Of course, this episode pretty much has Jimmy and Kim telling Howard's widow, that pretty much Howard, since Howard was murdered, the whole thing about it was that he committed suicide, and that's pretty much the cover story. The cover story is that Howard committed a cocaine-infused suicide, and that'll forever be his legacy, omitting the fact that he was murdered in cold blood and is now buried beneath the foundations of the super lab. So now when you watch Breaking Bad, there's so much more context to that damn super lab. And what I really like about it, if you really play into the history of Gus and Hector, Gus burying Lalo in his super lab is like a big fuck you to Hector. It's more along the lines of saying, hey, listen, one of your own found out my secret, and now he's dead, and that secret dies with him, and you'll never be able to prove it, and you'll never be able to prove what I have. The constant one-upping of Gus and Hector is one of the more interesting rivalries aside from Gus and Walt. And when you put this in the context with Lalo now buried in the super lab, it makes the rivalry that much more just hate fuel between Hector and Gus. I love stuff like that. It's good shit. Episode 9 is basically the final go-round. All the pieces fall into place. Jim and Kim, they separate. Jimmy McGill and Kim, they finally separate. And Jimmy pretty much losing the last vestige of his former life. Like, he's lost everything else. Now he fully immerses himself into the Saul Goodman character at the end of episode 9. So episode 9, that's pretty much what episode 9 is really all about, which is known as Fun and Games. Of course, Fun and Games also has this nice little scene between Mike and Nacho's father, Emmanuel, in which Mike remorsefully delivers the bad news about Nacho's death, and Emmanuel just telling Mike, listen, all you gangsters are the same. You don't know what revenge. Your idea of justice is just constant revenge. Like, it never, the killing never ends. And I like that as a final parting scene. And of course, Gus has a nice little scene where he's drinking champagne, and afterwards that's where he has the intention to finish the super lab, which is what he eventually does, leading to the events of Breaking Bad. So yeah, episodes 8 and 9 basically serve as a tie-up to the prequel series, putting everyone where they need to be. Kim leaves Jimmy, so that way Jimmy can fully immerse himself into Saul Goodman. Gus and Mike go their way into having the super lab be reconstructed. Hector's in the nursing home. The secret of Lalo will forever be buried beneath the super lab, as with the truth around Howard's demise. All right, so now the last 4 episodes 10 through 13, take place in the current timeline, or the Gene timeline, and this is where the sequel portion of Breaking Bad and the epilogue to Better Call Saul has the wrap up. So episode 10, entitled Nippy, doesn't really do much in terms of anything special. All it does is give us more into the character of Jeff, who was established in seasons 4 and 5. Unfortunately, he's not played by Don Harvey this season. He's replaced by Pat Healy. Not taking anything away from Pat Healy's portrayal as the character of Jeff, but when compared to Don Harvey in the scene that how he played Jeff in season 5, Pat Healy has a much more subservient type of portrayal to him. Like, he doesn't have that killer instinct that Don Harvey could have had to the character of Jeff. Especially when Saul is threatening Jeff, you can picture Don Harvey's version just countering back as well. We don't get that with the Pat Healy character, with Pat Healy's rendition of the character of Jeff. But that's not to say it was bad, because it wasn't. And the episode of Nippy does have some good moments with it. You have Mary Tyler Moore, the legendary Mary Tyler Moore, making her debut in the show as Jeff's mom. And Saul, as Gene, befriends Marion in order as a way to get to Jeff, and they pretty much devise a scheme to rob a department store, and they do this with Gene befriending two security guards by giving them Cinnabons. That's basically what episode 10 is all about. It's pretty much establishing the relationship between Gene, Jeff, and Marion, because this will all play a big role in the remaining episodes. Speaking of which, we get to episode 11, entitled Breaking Bad. The best part about Breaking Bad are pretty much the scenes of Saul, Walt, and Jesse. Aaron Paul and Bryan Cranston return to make cameos in the remaining episodes of Better Call Saul, which I love. We get more added context to a lot of things, which I really liked, which I really enjoyed as well. We get a recreation of the desert scene with the three of them, which was nice, where it wasn't me, it was Ignacio. We get a scene of them having a conversation in the RV, Jesse questioning who Lalo is, and with the context of who Lalo is now and how he pretty much put the fear of God into Saul. We see how Saul is really hesitant to answer that question and just brushes it off as he's nobody. But you can clearly tell that he's somebody that he fears. So I like all that stuff. We get a scene of Mike and Saul in the office, and Mike telling Saul not to do business with Walt, since Walt is an amateur and he's more or less either going to get himself killed or go to jail or die of cancer. But Saul goes along with it anyway because he sees potential in that. And the rest of Breaking Bad in terms of what the episode actually does in the Gene timeline, pretty much Gene and Jeff devise schemes to have identity theft. Pretty much Gene gets a bunch of dudes drunk at a bar, they go home, they sneak in, they take shots of their identity, and then they move on. So in terms of actual context in the Gene timeline, nothing really of note happens, with the exception of Gene talking to Francesca on the phone, having a conversation with Kim that gets really, really heated. Of course, in the episode of Waterworks, we find out what exactly that conversation is all about. Speaking of which, Waterworks, the penultimate episode of Better Call Saul. This is where all the pieces start to line up. We find out what the conversation between Jim and Kim is, and it did not go well whatsoever. Pretty much at the end of the day, Kim is convincing Gene/Jimmy/Saul to turn himself in, but he's completely irritated by that and goes ballistic on a payphone. Kim, as a way to clear her conscience, she goes to Albuquerque and pretty much confesses to Howard's widow that, he never died of a suicide. There was never no drug addiction. He was murdered, and it was covered up. Of course, the wife, Cheryl, devastated by this, and Kim, with her conscience clear, breaks down on the bus, knowing that pretty much years, like 5 to 6 years of guilt has finally been lifted off her shoulders, but that's not the end of the road. There's still more. There's still a lot more to be done. It's called Saul, because Saul is still out there, trying to keep his tracks covered, until you get to the end of the episode, where one thing leads to another. Jeff winds up in jail. Saul calls Marion as a way to let her know about this, and he lets it slip that he knows more about law than he should know, which convinces Marion to do her research, and Marion is the one who makes Gene as Saul. And this leads to the climactic episode, Saul Gone, where all the pieces come to play. Everything gets wrapped up. And I like Saul Gone as a finale. It's similar to that of Felina from Breaking Bad. It's a satisfactory conclusion to Saul's story. We've seen him go from Jimmy McGill, a good-hearted guy who does take cheap tricks, but he has good intentions for it. But everyone around him continues just to put him down and belittle him, and then he transforms into Saul Goodman, somebody who's much worse than Jimmy McGill will ever do, somebody who is not opposed to the idea of people getting hurt as a way to make money. And then, of course, after the fallout of being Saul, he goes to Gene, and now everything works in reverse. Gene goes back to Saul doing his schemes and doing his cons, and now Saul has been captured. He's awaiting trial. He calls upon Bill Oakley, who is a recurring character since season 1 of Breaking Bad. Side note, the character of Bill Oakley is one of my favorite characters in Better Call Saul. He is downright funny. He has a lot of funny bits. I like the bantering between him and Saul Goodman. They have a lot of funny scenes together, just from season 1 all the way to now. And bringing him back for the finale, I thought was really, really cool, and I liked it a lot. Speaking of which, we also get the return of Marie Schrader, and she fills in a lot of gaps as to what happened post Breaking Bad. We find out that Skyler had a Francesca did that a couple episodes before. Marie Schrader gets brought back in and as a nice little cameo, and she's completely against Saul, wants the man to go to jail. But Saul, being the silver-tongued devil that he is, manages to get life imprisonment down to a 7-year stretch. And he was going to do something else, but of course it was revealed that Kim had already confessed to Howard's killing. So now got to scramble. What do you do now? So we get to the big trial. Now we get to the big trial, and this is where everything comes together. So pretty much now before the trial, Saul does this whole spiel, painting himself as a victim, trying to compare his situation to that of Marie's situation to be seen in the same light. And we go into this scene with the knowledge of only one juror has to believe Saul's story in order for him to get the win. But what makes it interesting is that Saul takes a detour, and instead of painting himself as a victim, he paints himself for what he really was, the co-conspirator. What I like about this is that it clears his conscience. Now, throughout this episode, there were flashbacks that were featuring Mike, that featured Walt, and that featured Chuck. And they all deal with the theme of going back in time, of a time machine, and dealing with regrets. And we find out at the end of the episode what Jimmy McGill's biggest regret was. In the Mike portion of this, Mike's regret was that he wishes he can go back in time so that way he can prevent himself from taking his first bribe. In Mike's mind, if he'd never taken that first bribe as a cop, his son would have never been killed. Jimmy, his regret was that he could have walked away and made more money. It's all about money when it comes to Saul. With Walter White and the Walter White regret, the biggest regret Walter White had was that he left gray matter. He let himself get forced out of gray matter, and he has regrets about being forced out of gray matter, which was something he helped create because it could have made him famous and had a lot of money. In this, Saul's regret in this is pretty much he did a slip and fall and actually hurt himself. Once again, he's dancing around what his biggest regret really was. Now, when we get to the last scene with Chuck, Saul's/Jimmy's biggest regret was that he never had the chance to have that heart-to-heart talk with Chuck, especially when it was Chuck who was the one that was reaching out to Jimmy. One of the rare times where Chuck wanted to be a brother to Jimmy, and Jimmy just brushed it off. That is beautiful. That is Jimmy's biggest regret, was not having the chance to talk to Chuck when Chuck was willing and able and wanted to. The fact that was Jimmy's biggest regret makes everything come full circle. And it all dials down to the trial, where he was Saul Goodman. But after confessing his sins and everything that he did, he cleared himself. And Saul Goodman became James McGill. He redeemed himself. And I like it. This Better Call Saul, when you watch it from season 1 to season 6, is the redemption story, pretty much. It's Saul Goodman going back to James McGill, facing his time with a clear conscience. I mean, yeah, he does end up going to jail, but it's a satisfactory conclusion, because when you actually look at it, listen, James McGill wasn't the world's greatest person, but he wasn't an evil monster either. He was somebody who did things because everyone in the world, to him, everyone was against him, and he had no support system. So he had to do the things he had to do just to get ahead. And he did. He took a lot of cheap tricks, took a lot of shortcuts, and people ended up getting hurt because of his actions. Him having remorse for that, and him coming to terms with that, and going back to who he is, which is James McGill, makes his story come full circle. It's just like Jesse Pinkman. He's somebody who was in a situation, but he had to adapt to the situation. Pinkman, was a good person at heart. Jimmy, good person at heart, but then that heart turned to stone. But then that stone broke and his heart became whole again. I like all that. And having Kim and Jimmy recreate their first scene together from season 1 when Jimmy's in jail, nice icing on the cake, satisfactory conclusion. So yeah, with all that being said, the final season of Better Call Saul is, to me, a 9 out of 10. This is a perfect conclusion to Saul Goodman's story and a nice finality to the Breaking Bad universe. despite my complaints that I do have, this season is near perfection to me. So yeah, those are my overall thoughts on Better Call Saul Season 9, the finality of not only Better Call Saul, but Breaking Bad as a whole. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.